You're listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast, celebrating hunting dog heritage, competition, and community. United Kennel Club has been the hunting dog sports home for coonhounds, beagles, retrievers, pointers, cur, feist, and more for over 125 years.
Welcome back, everybody, to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. I'm Trevor Wade. I'm the Coonhound Program Manager at UKC. And today we're switching it up a little bit. I don't have Alan here with me, and we're not going to bore you with hunting rules and results and all that good stuff. Actually, you know, a lot of us dog hunters or any dog people always find dog nutrition interesting, and we'll scour through the websites and the forums and have pages and pages of discussion on what we think about dog nutrition and that. And today we're going straight to an expert, and we're going to find out from her. I have Dr. Jill Cline. Dr. Jill Cline is the Professional and Veterinary Engagement Manager with Eukanuba. And Dr. Cline, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got started in dogs, and eventually how you got into your role with Eukanuba?
Sure. And let me thank you first for inviting me onto this podcast. I feel honored to be able to chat with you and your group. So thank you for that. I have been a dog lover for a long time. My father, actually, when I was a little girl, did some very casual coon hunting. So we had a blue tick hound for a little bit, but most of the time he had sporting dogs, more retriever style dogs. But I always had dogs and horses as a kid, and so I thought that I needed to learn to take care of dogs and horses, and had ambitions to be a veterinarian. And then I got to graduate school and discovered nutrition, and that I could dive into nutrition and make a career out of it. And honestly, still have doctor in front of my name. So when you're 20 years old, that's kind of exciting. I can go to graduate school and still be a doctor. But I discovered a real passion for how nutrients that sometimes you don't even know the names of have such a significant impact on the performance of people and animals both. I have a real interest in sporting dog nutrition because I have sporting dogs and have worked a lot with both sporting and working dogs, so I really enjoy that piece. So my background is a PhD in non-ruminant nutrition, and I have been part of Eukanuba now for 13 years. And prior to this, I had the opportunity to be part of our R&D group before moving into this role. So I got to do a lot of really fun stuff with the working and sporting dogs in R&D, helping to develop diets and things.
That's awesome. And we're glad to have you on, somebody with some actual knowledge on here besides the rest of the folks we usually have on here, me and Alan talking. But yeah, so today we're going to, obviously I'm the Coonhound Program Manager here. I'm pretty specific to coon dogs. Obviously, other folks listen to the Hunting Ops podcast. We have beaglers and squirrel hunters and retriever folks and pointer folks and shed dog folks and all kinds of different people. But if some of my questions sound like I'm kind of focusing on coonhounds a little bit, that's just because that's what my background is a little bit. So, but I think the first thing we'll talk about, obviously, Eukanuba and UKC have had a partnership now since 2020. And that was about the time that you guys started with your premium performance line, and when you guys kind of rolled that out or revamped it and all that sort of thing. And with the new formulas and coonhound specifically, you know, we're seeing a lot of coonhounds shift that way. If a coon hunter or a houndsman who may not be familiar with Eukanuba was looking to switch this feed, how would they figure out which of these formulas or may be the right one for them?
Good question. The really cool thing about the premium performance line is that the core of the diets, meaning that the micronutrients that, again, you may not even know the names of those nutrients, but their value to the dog is the same across the entire line. So you make your decision about which product you want based simply on calorie needs. So with the dogs that you all have, most of the time, particularly in hunting season, your dogs would probably be on the product called Exercise because it's moderately high in calories and moderately high in fat, and it is built for dogs to work 2 to 4 to 6 hours versus working versus the working product, which is built for like sled dog style, heavy working dogs. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
The difference between the two?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Part of the prep leading up to the show, I had listened to you on the Gun Dog It Yourself podcast that you did, and you guys went really in depth in different things, and I really enjoyed that. But part of it you talked about was how some of the nutrients and your dog's diet could have effect on other things. I think as coon hunters or as houndsmen, a lot of times we think, as long as your dog is looking fine to the eye and its coat's looking nice and that things that it's getting everything it needs, but the nutrients that it's getting from its diet uh, could actually have a factor to factor in on how it performs in the field as far as the dog's brain and nose and everything else.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, particularly if we talk about things like antioxidants. So antioxidants, when you're reading the label, are going to be things like vitamin A, um, beta carotene, vitamin E. Um, those are the types of vitamins that make up antioxidants. And the the way that those micronutrients can help to improve your dog's performance in the field is they help to manage inflammation. And so by managing the inflammation, particularly in the nose, it helps to increase the probability that volatiles will cross over, and that the dog will be able to make the link between what they're smelling and their brain telling them what they're smelling, and then them being able to indicate to you what it is that they think that they've smelled. And that's one of the really fascinating things about these micronutrients, right? So you have to manage the membrane health of the dogs, through antioxidants and through things like omega-3 fatty acids, so that it increases their ability to not only smell the volatiles that you're asking them to look for, but also be able to process what they're smelling, and to be able to indicate to you what it is that they've smelled. Because sometimes in dogs that aren't getting enough carbohydrates, or dogs who the membranes are somewhat swollen because we don't have enough omega-3 fatty acids or antioxidants in the diet, those guys may smell it, but their ability to tell you that they've smelled it is compromised because their brain isn't working as quickly as we would like it to, because they don't have the right combination of fuel. Does it make sense, Trevor?
Absolutely it does. And we'll kind of shift gears here a little bit. In part of our prep for this show, also we kind of laughed about some of the myths you hear about dog nutrition out there a lot, and you'll see it on our forums and on I see it a lot on Facebook discussions about taking dogs to a non-corn or a non-grain diet. And in talking to a lot of the folks at Eukanuba, and I know you're probably the expert in this, that's corn and grain they're not a negative thing in a dog's diet. They're actually pretty vital.
It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is this misconception in the coonhound world that corn makes dogs run hot.
Yeah.
Is that the
Yes,
right
ma'am.
way that you all are sort of filtering it? And I feel like that myth comes from the same space that the horse people have that myth. So a lot of times you'll hear horse people say, I got to cut back on the grain for my horse because he's running hot or he's too high. And metabolically, I think that where that myth comes from is that corn is a very effective carbohydrate source. So it provides energy really quickly. So people perceive that because their dogs have more energy quickly on a diet that has corn, that they must be running hot, or that it's going to raise their temperature because they have so much energy, because they can move faster and stronger with the more efficient energy source. So what I'd like to say about that is that the myths around corn, it makes my dog run hot, it's a filler, it doesn't provide any nutrients to my dog. There was this misconception because of the way we used to use corn 10 or 15 years ago. These days, our ability to use corn and the nutrients in corn are much more effective because of the technology we use to make pet food today compared to 15 or 20 years ago. And if I were to explain that to you, what I mean by that is most people, when they think about corn, they think about how humans process corn. So I don't know about you, but Memorial Day, it was the first time that corn was sort of in season, and we had corn along with our hot dogs and hamburgers. And if you eat corn on the cob, you see corn on the cob at the end at the other end, right? So we know that as humans, we don't process corn on the cob very well. We perceive then the dogs also don't process corn very well. And it's true, if we feed them a whole corn, that's the case. But Trevor, do you eat Mexican food?
I do.
Do you like corn chips?
I do.
So corn chips, when we eat them, we don't usually see them at the other end because they are effectively processed by our GI tract, right? You don't. It's not like the next day you're like, oh yeah, I had corn chips, because you can tell it when you go to the bathroom.
Right.
Unlike when you eat corn, right? And the difference is that when we have corn chips or we have corn tortillas, it's because the corn is ground really finely, and therefore it's digestible. And that means that all of the nutrients that are in corn are digestible and super effective. So things, I mean, obviously energy from the carbohydrates, but corn also has not a not insignificant amount of protein, and it also has all of these antioxidants that we've been talking about. So what makes corn yellow are the antioxidants in it, and those are the antioxidants that can help with ability to smell and ability for the brain to detect what it is that they've process what's been smelled. Does that make sense? It's a lot of words.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And you talked about some digestive issues there, and it kind of segues into the next question we have here, and that's how can you tell if the digestive issues are that a dog may have are food related, or it could be something else? Is there a tall tale sign to look for?
You know, kind of my view on that is, if it is something that's acute, so things have been fine, and then wow, today my dog has diarrhea, or today my dog has soft stool, that is usually indicative of, and I hate to paint hounds with a bad brush, but having had a couple of hounds in my life, sometimes they eat stuff they're not supposed
Sure.
to. So if there is this acute GI upset, that's usually either a dietary indiscretion, they ate something they weren't supposed to, or they drank something they weren't supposed to, which happens a lot when we're running them hard. They stop and drink out of a dirty puddle. Or they've been exposed to something in the environment. If it's food related, it tends to be chronic. So soft stools for a month. So, I don't know that I'd wait that long. Soft stools for 2 weeks. That may tell you that either there's something that batch may not be a good batch, because it might have oxidized and be old, or that your dog is developing a sensitivity to it. The other thing, so there are 2 ways that dogs develop sensitivity to food. One of them is GI sensitivity, and that usually shows up as soft stool, or just dietary intolerance. They don't feel good, and it affects their performance. Or it shows up as a skin issue, and particularly with long-eared dogs, we know that they're already predisposed to ear issues anyway. But if you have chronic ear issues, sometimes that can be indicative of a food issue, because food issues can manifest as skin issues in dogs, unlike not often in people, but more so in dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that totally. We're going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about competition hunts, obviously. And most of our listeners are going to be folks who compete in competitions, whether they're weekend competitions or week-long competitions, different variations. But we'll kind of start out with kind of the big question. You know, obviously, since the partnership started, one of the things that Eukanuba likes to do is hand out food to some of our winners at the event. And a lot of times these are folks who, some of them will be Eukanuba users, some of them will be use different dog food, and maybe going into a transition. Maybe they won 2 or 3 months worth of dog food. What does that transition? What should that transition look like? Just your input on that, and then how long should a person wait to see? Is this dog food the right dog food for me?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends on what it is that you want the food to do for you in terms of what you would be looking for. So as far as body systems go, we tell people to take 10 days to switch from another food to Eukanuba. If you're switching from one Eukanuba product to the next, you don't need quite so much time because the core is the same. But it's about a 10-day transition, and that 10-day transition includes about a 3-day transition for the gut. So the first thing the gut does is it's like, oh my God, what is this new food? And so the enzymes in the gut have to adjust how many carbohydrate enzymes and how many protein enzymes are being produced to manage this new group of nutrients that they're seeing. So that's kind of 3 days to 3 weeks. It depends. You may see improvements in GI So improvements in stool quality in the first 3 days to a week. And then after that is when the gut starts to adapt to the new nutrient profile and starts to become more efficient. So you might see then smaller stools, you might see more energy. If what you're interested in is changes in skin and coat health, the skin turns over every 21 days. So in 3 weeks, you should start to see changes in skin health, like dandruff and that sort of thing. And in terms of hair coat, most coonhounds, because they are short-haired, tend to turn their hair over much more quickly than the long-haired dogs. So again, you should see a change between 3 weeks and 12 weeks in terms of significant coat quality changes. Although in the first 3 weeks, you might see changes based on the amount of sebum or oil on the dog's skin, because it depends on what you're feeding before you switch to Eukanuba. And then the last thing that changes, and so if you're talking about competition and you want to make certain that your dog is fully engaged in the food, it takes 12 weeks for the enzymes that are involved in muscle maintenance and repair to be completely onboarded to a new food. So a week for the gut, 3 weeks for the skin, and 12 weeks for the muscles, if I were to take all those words and squish them together.
Yeah, so a little bit of patience goes a long way here. Same as with people.
It does.
Same as with people. If we have a new diet, it takes a while for our bodies to show that change.
Yep, for sure.
Yep.
For sure.
So, and this probably, we're going to get to some competition related question here, but I guess I could start out, and it's something that's not really on our timeline here. So I guess I'm maybe throwing a curveball to you, but what would be your recommendation on optimum time to feed a dog? Does that vary depending on the dog and maybe the time of day you're hunting, whether it's morning, afternoon, night? And then also, I heard you talk about on the other podcasts as well, feeding 1 versus 2 times a day. Do you have a recommendation on that?
I have a pretty strong recommendation on feeding 2 times a day, just because I think that it increases the efficiency of the gut, so you get more out of the food. And so let me back up and I'll answer that, and then I'll answer you about timing of food. So the value in feeding twice a day is that you deliver a smaller volume at each meal, and it's a matter of surface area. And if you deliver a large amount of food at one time, then it doesn't provide the gut the space to break down each individual kibble. So it decreases the digestibility of the food. And to remind you, because I'm sure you know this, Trevor, but digestibility is the amount of the nutrients that cross out of the gut into the body to be used. So if the gut can't break down the food into the individual components so that they can cross the gut barrier, it decreases the digestibility and the efficiency of the diet. Therefore, feeding 2 meals so that there's more space for the gut to be able to break all of the food down is the most efficient way to get the best nutrients and the best nutrition out of the food that you're using, regardless of what it is. In terms of timing, there's been some really interesting data that came out by some behaviorists, not by nutritionists, who looked at learning ability and performance based on when a snack was delivered. And what they found in that study was that dogs who were provided a snack, so about 10% or so of their daily calorie needs, were able to perform complex cognitive tasks better than dogs who hadn't been fed anything. So although we never, ever want a dog, particularly the deep-chested coonhound dogs, to have a full belly when they're hunting, giving them a handful of food in this 30 to 90 minute window before they perform, closer to 30 if you can, appears to have value based on these studies. So I would say give a handful 30 minutes before you're going to hunt, and then feed them if you can within an hour after they're cool at the end of the hunt, and then make certain that you're feeding them as far in advance of the next hunt if possible. Right. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, that's a really, really great information there. I think people will really take that one to heart. And now let's try to put that into a competition scenario, and we'll kind of start out with a standard event, and I'm wondering if we're going to say we're going to the World Championship or to the Tournament of Champions where we're hunting for either a big title or a big prize or big money. Um, I honestly, just the first thing that pops in my mind is that we need to be as consistent as we can. But is there such thing as whenever you're trying to compete and you're hunting multi rounds in a night, should we deviate from the feeding times at all, or should we just try to be consistent?
Um, no, I would definitely deviate because the risk for bloat is higher than the value of having staying with your feeding times. So if you're hunting 2 hours and you've got 2 off or 3 off, and then you're hunting for another 2, I would feed a handful before the first hunt. I would feed a handful or a bit more between the hunts, and then at the end of the night after the second hunt is when I would feed the rest. And then if we're going the next morning, so say you get done at, I don't know, 2 a.m. Is that a fair statement? You get done at 2, you feed at 2:30, and then if you're not meant to hunt again until 10 or midnight, you feed midday, and then you can feed a handful again right before the next hunt in the next day. Does that make it? So it's with deep tested dogs, it's just not the value of providing the food is not worth the potential risk of bloat.
With Eukanuba, stamina is the one difference I'm seeing. When I'm running hair up north, my dogs will put on 10, 12, 15 miles of solid running, and they just don't tire as easily or as quickly. Oftentimes, my work schedule does not allow me to have the desired physical conditioning on my dogs, but even then, as many as 25 or more miles a day of hard running is just another day in the office. To me, it's been apparent Eukanuba's 30-20 sport formula is making that difference. Eukanuba, the official performance dog nutrition partner of UKC.
Yeah. So, so when we're talking about an event like Autumn Oaks, where it's even longer, we're talking about you can hunt Tuesday through Saturday. You could hunt 5-6 rounds over those days, 2 nights. Is there any need, do you think, to maybe feed a little bit more or feed a little bit less or anything to deviate the diet to combat that hard week of hunting? Especially since it's going to be Labor Day weekend, so it's usually still pretty warm out.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Trevor, because people don't realize that that hot temperatures actually increase calorie needs. So in really hot temperatures, the dog's calorie needs can be 50% more than you anticipate when they are during a thermal neutral zone, which would be about 75 degrees. So you have to allow for that fact. Which brings us to a whole bunch of different things that we need to consider. So if it's hot, you need to make certain that you're providing enough calories for the dog to thermoregulate, because panting burns calories. If they are working more, then clearly there's a higher calorie need there. What needs to be offset from that, however, is the bulk in the gut. So you need to make certain that you are feeding a diet that you don't need to feed more than 4 cups, 4.5 cups. And certainly in anyone's setting, you wouldn't want to feed more than 3 cups, because the gut's just not able to process all of that food, and it increases your risk for bloat. But if you have to have a calorie dense diet in order to be able to do that. So you might find that your dog needs to switch to, during these times, a diet that might be 20-30% higher in calories than what you normally would consider off season. And the important thing to understand there is that sometimes you can't just continue to feed more food of the off season food, because there's too much food. And it also then requires too much water in order to help process that food. So you're weighing your dog way down. So if we talk about something like Autumn Oaks, where over this 5-day period, you'd have that many different rounds, and you would have to manage your feeding schedule around that. I'm still a firm believer in that handful 30 minutes before hunting. But if you know that you're going to have a 12 to 15 hour space before your next round of hunting, then that's where you can increase the amount of food that you're delivering in those 2 meals to meet the calorie needs of your dog. And then again, as I said, it also leads to the hydration
Right.
issue. Because a little rule of thumb that I like to pass along to everybody is, for every 1 cup of food, your dog needs 2 cups of
Wow.
water. And people don't realize that, because it just takes that much water to process food. So that's not even about staying hydrated. That's just about processing food. So what I tell people, and everybody rolls their eyes when I say this, but I'm going to say it to you anyway. You should measure out the amount of water that your dog needs as a minimum, so that you can monitor how much they're actually drinking. Because a lot of times those high drive dogs, they forget to
Yeah.
drink,
Right.
right? They are anticipating the hunt, or they're participating in the hunt, or they're thinking about the next one, particularly at something like Autumn Oaks, where they know that they're going to be going again, and they become cats. They've forgotten that they're thirsty unless you provide them provide them water. And what we tell some of the working dog guys is, teach your dog to drink on command. We teach them to go to the bathroom on command. We tell them when to eat. You can teach them to drink on command. And if it's something that you have the opportunity to, it will serve you well. But certainly measuring the water. So like my guys get 3 cups of food a day. So, they get anywhere from 6 to 9 cups of water, depending on how busy we are during the day.
Wow. Yeah, I think most people, most houndsmen, they could get lost in the weekend and really underhydrate their dog, and that's a good point to bring up, and I'm glad we're segueing there. Is that you can have the best dog food in the world, the best diet in the world, but if they're not hydrating properly, it can really wear a dog down pretty quick. Is there any signs that we can tell from the dog that maybe isn't getting enough water? And if we're having trouble getting them to drink over a weekend, is there such thing as maybe mixing it in their food or things to encourage them to drink water?
Yeah, the thing is people often ask me, what are the signs that my dog is dehydrated? The problem is that once the signs start to show up, like, the gums and the stickiness and stuff, you're already like 4 hours behind where you
Yeah.
should be in terms of managing it. I guess sort of the tips that I always share, and I'm sure that you guys already know these things, but rinsing out their mouth regularly, so that they are not panting through a lot of saliva, burns less calories and they lose less water that way. But providing them with baited water is also a good way to help increase their hydration. So we suggest baiting water with either, depends on your dog, a little bit of kibble at the bottom of the bucket, or upping the ante on that and putting a little bit of canned food at the bottom of the bucket. Or if you don't have anything like that, a piece of beef jerky, because almost every hunter has beef jerky in his
That's right.
pocket. Um, putting a piece of beef jerky at the bottom of the bucket. A lot of dogs, if your dog isn't the smart one that flips it over just to get the beef jerky out and dumps all the water, because that
Yeah.
happens. And then floating their food. And there's a difference between floating their food and making their food, soaking their food. So when we suggest that people float their food, and again, so if you're feeding 2 cups of food, put 4 cups of water in, add it, and immediately feed it. So then they don't lose the dental quality of the crunchy kibble, because it'll still stay crunchy. But if you put the water on it and let it sit, then you lose the dental quality of the food. So what you're gaining is hydration, but what you're losing is some of the efficacy of the dry kibble.
Wow. Yeah. Never think about things like that. Yeah, and I hope I'll stop right there and try to let people know that that's a good point. Good reason to always carry water on you, especially with some of the major events. It's still pretty warm out at Autumn Oaks time, even at the World Championship. Sometimes, depending on where it is in the country, we can have some hot nights. Carry some water on you, not just so you can give your dog some water to drink, but also cleaning out its mouth and helping it breathe a little bit easier. That's all good stuff. Appreciate that, Dr. Klein. And next, we'll shift gears into some more things that you see discussed a lot on coonhound pages and forums and things. And that's talking about how extreme conditions would affect how we feed our dogs. So I used to live in Southeast Tennessee, where it could get pretty hot during the summer time of year. And obviously there's even worse case scenarios if you're in Louisiana or South Carolina, Georgia, where it just gets really hot in the summer. And maybe you don't hunt your dog as much in the summer. And then vice versa. Now I live up here in Michigan, Wisconsin area, and it gets really cold in the winter. And whenever the snow's on the ground, I'm not a big fan of hunting in the snow, so I'll take a couple months off during that time of year from hunting and just let him run around the yard a little bit instead of taking him to the woods. But during those times, would you ever suggest changing feeds to a lower quality feed, and to a feed with less protein, less fat? That's what I'm trying to say. Backing down on how much food you're feeding. What would be, or vice versa at times whenever you're not hunting to your dog as much?
Yeah, really good question. So what's important to understand is that if you look at pet food bags, and they always have a recommended feeding guide on them, and people usually don't look at that, but it's there for a purpose. And if it says your 70-pound dog should get 5 cups of food a day, if your dog is eating 75% less, is only eating 75% of that amount, I should have used a different number because I can't do the math on that. If your dog is eating 4 cups a day and you're only feeding 3.5, so 75% of the recommended daily amount, or if your dog is eating 4.5 cups a day, my math may not be great, which is 125% of the suggested amount, then you are feeding your dog outside of the requirement that would be providing the appropriate micronutrients to your dog. So regardless of the calorie content, diets are always built on micronutrients per calorie of food. So if you don't feed enough, or if you feed too much, then you are messing up the intention of the micronutrients for that diet. That being said, if you, at least, and I can share how we do it for the Eukanuba diets, that's why we have this premium performance range where all of the micronutrients are the same and they deliver at the same level, but they're based on the calorie differences. So sprint has lower protein and fat, and then exercise has higher, and then work is even higher. So within our range, you could certainly step down to the next lower level of calories and maintain all of the micronutrients. In other diets, you can step down in calorie because you don't want your dog to get fat in the off season, because it just makes it harder to get them in shape at the beginning of the next season. And as they get older, just like in people, it's harder and harder to get back in shape. But you just need to make certain that you are making those transitions with enough time for the dog to adjust.
Gotcha. Good information there. Let's see here. So it kind of on the, let's see, we kind of covered this next one here, but we were talking about how it may differ whether you're hunting or not hunting during that time of year. And you kind of covered that part of it. But one thing I heard you talk about on another podcast was kind of paying attention to your dog. I know dogs may be different and things like that, but you guys have a 9-point body condition score. And you talked about it some on the other podcast where, a lot of times as hunters or any dog folks who are active with their dogs, we can hear, oh, your dog is too skinny. We hear that a lot. And obviously we know that a lot of times when somebody's saying that, it's actually in good running shape. Obviously there's some dogs that are too skinny, and we know that, but most of them are in good running shape. Can you talk about that a little bit at the body scale and how this works?
Sure. I think that the first thing I'd like to talk about is explaining how to do a body condition score. So we have this 9-point scale, and it's been validated with thousands of dogs about how the dog looks and feels under your hands is indicative of the percent of body fat that the dog has. And so the way that we suggest that you measure body condition score is 2 ways. One, visually. So if you look at your dog from the top down, so the way I teach my dogs to stand with their hindquarters against my knees so that I can look at them top down, and they should have an hourglass shape. And I understand that not all dogs are built the same. They don't all have the same conformation, but there still should be a difference between where the ribs are and where the hips are. It should go in a little bit. Now, if we were talking about Labradors, I would tell you that dogs shouldn't have a butt so big you can put a plate on it. But when it comes to hounds, they don't ever have a butt that big, except maybe Rhodesian Ridgebacks. Those guys, sometimes their butts can get big. But if you look at your dog from the top down, they should have an hourglass shape. And if you look at that from the side, and again, with most hounds, this is almost always the case, you should see a significant difference between the bottom of the chest and where they tuck up. And so there should be, I don't know, what's that, a 30-degree angle probably for the most part between those guys. But probably the better way for houndsmen to evaluate their dogs is to do a hands-on evaluation. And the way that we tell people to do that, again, is have the hindquarters against your knees, and then take your thumbs and put them together right behind the shoulder blades, and run your fingers from the shoulder blades to the end of the ribs. What that should feel like is similar to the way your knuckles feel. So if your dog is too skinny, for most people, when they make a fist, their knuckles stick up. And if your dog feels like your knuckles when you make a fist, that means that your dog is probably too thin. And at the same time, you would probably be able to feel their vertebrae when you run your hands down their back. If, however, you put your hands on your dog and it feels like the pads of your fingers, right where your fingers meet your palm, that kind of spot between your fingers and your palm on the inside of your hand, if it feels like that, that means that your dog is probably a little fat. There's probably a little bit too much coverage across the ribs. But if you hold your hand up and you run your hand across your knuckles on the top of your hand when your hand is flat, like you're waving, the way your knuckles feel when your fingers are straight is how your dog's ribs should feel when you put hands on. And that is typically a dog on our 9-point scale in the 4 to 5 range, which we consider optimal. Most hounds usually sit in the 4 to 4.5 range because they're just naturally built to be skinny athletes. But anything lower than that, if you can feel individual ribs, particularly the ones up close to the front legs, then your dog's probably a little ribby and a little thin.
Yeah, and it's a really great. You guys have it laid out good on this PDF that I printed here, and I'll make sure that we share that whenever we share the podcast. I think that'll be good information for people. And yeah, I've seen some dogs on both ends of the spectrum here, so that 4 to 5 looks pretty good for an ideal athlete to me. So I guess we're getting close to the end here, and it's gone by really quick. I enjoyed us talking here. I think this hopefully we have some future conversations about some more in-depth things, and I know that we do have some things planned about possibly chatting more in the future. But so yeah, with that being said, Jill, I guess that's the end of our conversation today, and I look forward to talking to you about some more stuff in the future. I think we got most of the highlights, don't you think?
I think so. I think we've teased some really cool stuff that we could dive into the next time if you have me back.
Yeah. Especially, I think that we've kind of had some conversations in pre-meetings to talk about some new puppy feed you guys have coming on, and some small chew bites and things like that. So I'm kind of excited about where Eukanuba's going. I'm glad that UKC has a partnership with them, and looking forward to the future. And I thank you again for giving us a little bit of your time here.
Thank you so much.
Alan, I know we both have new Dogtra Pathfinder 2s. How are you liking yours so far?
I'm liking it. I've even had the opportunity now to use mine where I didn't have service, where I download the map of that area, and it works flawlessly. Love it.
I agree. I really like my Dogtra Pathfinder 2 as well. I've used it quite a bit the past few months. I really like the crystal clear maps. I like that it doesn't lose service very much, and I don't have many bad things to say about it at all. Dogtra Pathfinder 2, the official GPS collar partner of UKC. Thank you for listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow so you don't miss any of our new episodes or content.